The salty breeze carried the sound of boots hitting concrete as Lieutenant Sarah Chun stepped out of the military transport vehicle at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. Her uniform was crisp, her posture perfect, but she could already feel the weight of dozens of eyes measuring her up. At 28, she had worked harder than most people twice her age to earn her place here, but looking around at the sea of muscled, sun-weathered faces, she knew her real test was just beginning. Another desk jockey. She heard someone mutter behind her as she shouldered her gear bag. The comment was followed by low chuckles from a group of SEAL trainees who were taking a break from their morning physical training. Their faces were streaked with sweat and sand. Their eyes held that particular mixture of exhaustion and pride that came from surviving another brutal session. Sarah kept walking, her expression neutral. She had heard worse during her time at the Naval Academy, during her officer training, and during every assignment that had led her to this moment. What these men didn't know was that she wasn't here as support staff or administrative personnel. She was here because she had something they needed, something that would soon become very clear. The base was a maze of low buildings, training facilities, and obstacle courses that looked like they had been designed by someone with a serious grudge against the human body. Sarah had studied the layout countless times, but seeing it in person was different. This wasn't just a military base. It was a proving ground where ordinary men were forged into something extraordinary. The air itself seemed to vibrate with intensity and purpose. As she made her way toward the main administrative building to check in, Sarah passed a group of instructors gathered around a clipboard. They were the kind of men who looked like they could bench press a small car without breaking a sweat. One of them, a grizzled chief petty officer with arms like tree trunks, looked up as she approached. "You lost, Lieutenant?" he asked, his voice carrying just enough edge to make it clear this wasn't really a helpful question. "No, Chief. Reporting for assignment," Sarah replied calmly. The man's eyes flicked to her rank insignia, then back to her face. "Assignment? What kind of assignment?" Before Sarah could answer, another voice cut through the conversation. "Chun, there you are." A tall man in khakis approached, his collar bearing the silver eagles of a full colonel. The instructors immediately straightened, recognizing senior rank even if they didn't recognize the man himself. "Colonel Morrison," Sarah said, snapping to attention and rendering a crisp salute. "At ease, Lieutenant." "Gentlemen," he nodded to the instructors, "this is Lieutenant Chun. She'll be working with your teams on a special project. I trust you'll give her your full cooperation." The chief's expression shifted slightly, confusion replacing the earlier dismissiveness. "What kind of special project, sir?" Colonel Morrison's smile was thin. "That's classified for now, Chief. What I can tell you is that Lieutenant Chun has skills that will be invaluable to your operations. She's not here to observe or take notes. She's here to contribute." After the colonel left, Sarah could feel the instructor's eyes boring into her back as she continued toward the building. She understood their skepticism. In their world, respect was earned through shared suffering, through proving you could carry your weight when everything was on the line. Her rank meant nothing here if she couldn't back it up with performance. The administrative office was mercifully air-conditioned, a sharp contrast to the heat that was already building outside, despite the early hour. A petty officer behind the desk looked up as she entered, his expression neutral but professional. "Lieutenant Chun reporting for duty," she said, presenting her orders. The petty officer scanned the documents, his eyebrows rising slightly. "Ma'am, these orders are unusual. It says here you're assigned to direct training support, but there's no specific unit designation. And there's a note about special clearance requirements." "That's correct, petty officer. I believe there are additional briefing materials that should have arrived separately." He rifled through a stack of folders before pulling out a thick manila envelope marked with several security classifications. "This came in this morning. I was told to give it to you personally." He paused, studying her face. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what's your background?" The guys are already talking, and they're wondering what kind of special project needs a Navy lieutenant. Sarah took the envelope, feeling its weight. Inside would be the details of why she was really here, The mission that had brought her across the country to this place where legends were made and broken daily. I'm a cryptologist, petty officer. I break codes. His expression shifted to one of polite confusion. Kodis, Mong. Among other things. Sarah tucked the envelope under her arm. Where am I billeted? Building 12, room 108. It's officer quarters, but I should warn you, it's pretty basic. Most of the officers here don't spend much time in their rooms anyway. As Sarah made her way across the base to her quarters, she passed more groups of trainees engaged in various forms of torture disguised as physical training. They were running, climbing, carrying heavy objects, and generally looking like they were questioning every life choice that had led them to this moment. A few glanced her way, their expressions ranging from curious to dismissive. Her room was indeed basic. A narrow bed, a small desk, a locker, and a window that looked out onto one of the training areas. Sarah set her gear down and opened the classified envelope. The first document made everything clear. 3 weeks ago, a SEAL team had been compromised during a mission in Eastern Europe. Their communications had been intercepted, their codes broken, and 2 good men had died as a result. The investigation had revealed that enemy forces were using sophisticated new encryption methods, stuff that was beyond the capabilities of standard military intelligence. They needed someone who could not only break the new codes, but also develop countermeasures in real time under field conditions. Someone who understood both the technical aspects of cryptography and the practical realities of special operations. Sarah had been chosen because she was one of only a handful of people in the Navy who had both the technical skills and the security clearance necessary for the job. Her record was impressive. She had cracked encryption systems that had stumped entire teams of analysts, and she had done it while serving aboard ships in hostile waters, under conditions that would have broken most people's concentration. But there was something else, something the files didn't mention. Sarah had requested this assignment. When the opportunity had come up, she had volunteered, knowing full well that she would be walking into a world where her presence would be questioned, where she would have to prove herself in ways that went far beyond her technical abilities. The truth was, Sarah was tired of being the smart woman behind the desk, tired of solving problems from a distance while other people took the risks. She wanted to be part of the action, to use her skills where they mattered most. This assignment was her chance to prove that intelligence and courage weren't mutually exclusive. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find a young sailor, barely out of his teens, holding a clipboard. "Lieutenant Shun, I'm supposed to escort you to your first briefing. The team leaders want to meet you." As they walked across the base, the sailor, who introduced himself as Seaman Rodriguez, chattered nervously. "Ma'am, the guys are really curious about what you're here for. There are all kinds of rumors going around. Some people think you're here to evaluate the training program. Others think you're some kind of inspector." "What do you think, Rodriguez?" He glanced at her sideways. "Honestly, Mong, I think you're here because something bad happened and the Navy needs someone smart to fix it. The instructors have been really tense lately, and there's been a lot of classified briefings." Smart kid, Sarah thought. They approached a low building that looked like it had been built for function rather than form. Through the windows, she could see several men in uniforms seated around a table, their posture suggesting this was a serious meeting. Rodriguez held the door open for her. "Good luck, ma'am." Sarah straightened her shoulders and walked into the room. The conversation stopped immediately, and 6 pairs of eyes turned to assess her. These were the team leaders, the men who would be working with her, and their expressions ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. "Gentlemen," she said, taking a seat at the table, "I'm Lieutenant Shun, and I'm here to help you stay alive." The silence that followed Sarah's introduction stretched uncomfortably long. The team leaders exchanged glances, their faces showing various degrees of skepticism. Finally, a man with sergeant stripes and a weathered face that spoke of countless deployments leaned back in his chair. "Help us stay alive," he repeated slowly. "That's interesting, Lieutenant, because most of us have been doing that just fine without help for quite a few years now." Sarah recognized the challenge in his voice, but kept her expression neutral. Sergeant Martinez, I presume? Your last mission in Romania suggests otherwise. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Martinez's casual posture evaporated, replaced by the coiled tension of a man ready for a fight. What do you know about Romania? I know that your communications were compromised 17 minutes after insertion. I know that the enemy was waiting for you at the primary extraction point. And I know that Petty Officer Williams and Chief Thompson died because someone broke your codes. Sarah's voice remained steady, professional, but there was steel underneath. I also know that the same encryption vulnerabilities are being exploited across multiple theaters, and unless we fix them, more good people are going to die. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Sarah could see the impact of her words in their faces. Romania had been a disaster, the kind of mission that haunted operators long after they returned home. A younger man with lieutenant's bars spoke up. You're saying our codes aren't secure? I'm saying your codes are broken by people who are very good at what they do, and they're getting better. The encryption protocols you're using were state-of-the-art 5 years ago. Today, they might as well be written in crayon. An older chief petty officer with graying temples leaned forward. And what exactly are you planning to do about it? Sarah opened her briefcase and pulled out a tablet. With a few swipes, she brought up a complex display of mathematical formulas and algorithmic structures. I'm going to develop new encryption methods that can be generated and modified in real time in the field. Instead of using static codes that can be broken given enough time and computing power, you'll have dynamic systems that change faster than any enemy can adapt to them. Sounds complicated, Martinez said, his tone suggesting he thought complicated meant impractical. The theory is complicated. The implementation will be simple. You'll have a device no bigger than a smartphone that generates unbreakable codes on demand. No more radio silence periods. No more compromised communications. No more walking into ambushes because the enemy knows where you're going. One of the younger SEALs raised his hand tentatively. Ma'am, how do we know this will actually work? I mean, no offense, but you've never been on a mission. You don't know what it's like out there. Sarah had been waiting for this question. You're absolutely right, Petty Officer Jenkins. I've never been shot at, never had to carry a wounded teammate to safety, never had to make life or death decisions in the middle of a firefight. She paused, meeting each of their eyes in turn. But I've spent the last 8 years breaking codes that other people said were unbreakable. I've intercepted enemy communications that saved the lives of Marines in Afghanistan. I've cracked terrorist encryption that prevented bombings in 3 different countries. And I've done it all from behind a desk because that's where the Navy thought I could do the most good. She stood up, her small frame somehow commanding attention in the room full of much larger men. But here's the thing about codes, gentlemen. They're not just mathematical puzzles. They're lifelines. Every time I break an enemy code, I'm potentially saving lives. Every time our codes get broken, people die. This isn't academic for me. This is personal. Chief Ramirez, a man who looked like he could wrestle a bear and win, spoke up. What do you need from us? I need you to teach me how you operate. I need to understand your communication protocols, your mission parameters, how you actually use these codes in the field. And then, I need you to help me test the new systems under realistic conditions. You want to train with us? Martinez's eyebrows shot up. I want to earn my place with you. I know I don't look like much compared to you guys, but I can run, I can shoot, and I can think under pressure. If I'm going to design systems that work for you, I need to understand what you go through. The team leaders exchanged looks again, but this time the skepticism was mixed with something else. Respect, maybe, or at least the beginning of it. Lieutenant Bradley, the younger officer who had spoken earlier, cleared his throat. Ma'am, our training isn't exactly designed for people with your background. Sarah almost smiled at his diplomatic phrasing. You mean it's not designed for small Asian women who spend most of their time looking at computer screens? I didn't say that, ma'am. You didn't have to. This time she did smile, and it transformed her entire face. Look, I'm not asking you to lower your standards or make special accommodations. I'm asking for the chance to prove that brains and guts aren't mutually exclusive. If I can't keep up, I'll stick to the tech side and stay out of your way. But if you can, then what? Ramirez asked. Then, maybe you'll have something you've never had before. A code expert who understands your world from the inside. Someone who can design systems that actually work the way you need them to work. Martinez leaned forward, his expression serious. Lieutenant, with all due respect, our training has broken men who outweighed you by 100 pounds and had years of military experience. We're not talking about a few morning jogs and some target practice. I understand that, Sergeant. I'm not asking you to go easy on me. I'm asking you to give me the same chance you'd give any other officer who wanted to earn their way into your unit. The silence stretched again, but this time it felt different. Sarah could sense the internal debate going on in each man's mind. Finally, Chief Ramirez spoke. There's something you should know about us, Lieutenant. We don't care what academy you went to, we don't care what your test scores were, and we don't care what computer programs you can write. We care about whether you'll be there when things go wrong. We care about whether you'll fight for the man next to you, even when everything seems hopeless. I understand that, Chief, and I'm hoping you'll give me the chance to prove it. Martinez stood up abruptly. Fine, you want to train with us? Training starts at 0500 tomorrow. Physical training, weapons handling, tactical communications, the whole package. You keep up, you're in your place. You fall behind. He shrugged. I won't fall behind. We'll see. Martinez gathered his papers. One more thing, Lieutenant. Don't expect any special treatment because you're an officer. Out there, rank doesn't mean anything if you can't do the job. After the team leaders filed out, Sarah remained seated for a moment, processing what had just happened. She had gotten what she wanted, a chance to prove herself. But she also understood the magnitude of what she had committed to. These men were warriors forged by years of training and combat experience. She was about to step into their world and try to match their pace. As she walked back to her quarters, Sarah passed a group of SEAL trainees engaged in what looked like a particularly brutal exercise involving logs, sand, and a lot of shouting from instructors. They were covered in sweat and grit, their faces showing the kind of exhaustion that came from pushing the human body beyond its normal limits. One of the trainees caught sight of her and nudged his buddy. "Check it out," he said, loud enough for her to hear. "The lieutenant's going to train with the teams. This should be interesting." His tone made it clear that by interesting, he meant amusing. Sarah kept walking, but she made a mental note of his face. Tomorrow, she would begin proving that their assumptions about her were wrong. That evening, Sarah spread out maps, technical specifications, and training manuals across her small desk. She had a lot to learn and not much time to learn it. The physical training would be challenging enough, but she also had to master the tactical aspects of SEAL operations while simultaneously developing new cryptographic systems. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her sister back home. "How's the new assignment? Making friends with the Navy SEALs yet?" Sarah stared at the message for a moment before typing back, "Working on it. Wish me luck." "You don't need luck," came the reply. "You need body armor." If only she knew, Sarah thought as she settled down to study. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the most challenging period of her life, but also potentially the most rewarding. She had spent years proving she was smart enough to belong in the Navy's elite circles. Now she had to prove she was tough enough as well. Outside her window, she could hear the sound of night training exercises, boots on pavement, shouted commands, the splash of bodies hitting water. This was a world that never slept, never stopped pushing its people to be better, stronger, faster. Tomorrow, she would become part of that world. The alarm clock screamed at 0430, but Sarah was already awake. She had been lying in bed for the past hour, her mind racing through everything she had studied the night before. Physical training protocols, weapon specifications, communication procedures. She had crammed as much information as possible into her brain, knowing that knowledge alone wouldn't be enough to get her through what was coming. She dressed quickly in the PT gear she had been issued. Shorts, t-shirt, running shoes that felt flimsy compared to the combat boots she had seen the SEALs wearing. Looking at herself in the small mirror, Sarah acknowledged that she looked exactly like what she was a small woman about to attempt something that most people would consider impossible. The training area was already buzzing with activity when she arrived at 0455. Groups of trainees were stretching, checking equipment, and engaging in the kind of nervous banter that preceded something unpleasant. Sarah spotted Sergeant Martinez near a collection of wooden logs that looked like they weighed as much as she did. "Lieutenant Shun," he called out, "glad you could make it. Hope you had a good night's sleep, because it's the last comfortable night you're going to have for a while." Several of the trainees turned to look at her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed amusement. Sarah recognized a few faces from the day before, including the trainee who had made the crack about her training with the teams. "Gentlemen," Martinez addressed the group, "we have a special addition to today's training. Lieutenant Shun will be participating in all activities. I want to be very clear about something. She gets no special treatment, no modified exercises, no different standards. She keeps up, or she doesn't. Everyone understand?" A chorus of "Hoo-yah, Sergeant," came from the trainees. Martinez turned to Sarah. "Last chance to reconsider, Lieutenant. Once we start, there's no quitting, no timeouts, no I change my mind. You're in it for the duration." "Understood, Sergeant." "Outstanding. Let's begin." What followed was 2 hours of the most intense physical activity Sarah had ever experienced. They started with a 4-mile run along the beach, the soft sand making every step a struggle. Sarah had always been a runner, but this was different. The pace was punishing, and the weight of expectation from the instructors, from the trainees, from herself, made every breath feel labored. By the 1-mile mark, she was already falling behind the main group. By 2 miles, she was running alone except for an instructor who jogged alongside her, his breathing barely elevated while hers sounded like a steam engine. "You can stop any time, ma'am," the instructor said conversationally. "No shame in recognizing your limitations." Sarah didn't waste breath on a reply. She focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on maintaining her pace even as her lungs burned and her legs turned to rubber. When they finally reached the turnaround point, she was nearly 2 minutes behind the lead group, but she was still moving. The run back was a nightmare of cramping muscles and oxygen debt, but Sarah forced herself to maintain her pace. When she finally stumbled across the finish line, she was dead last, her face red and streaming with sweat, her shirt soaked through. But she had finished. "Outstanding time, Lieutenant," Martinez said dryly. "Only 3 minutes slower than our slowest trainee ever." Sarah was bent over, hands on her knees, trying to get her breathing under control. "What's next?" she managed to gasp. "Log PT." If the run had been bad, log PT was torture. The logs were telephone poles that had been cut to various lengths, each one requiring multiple people to lift and maneuver. Sarah found herself paired with 3 trainees for exercises that involved lifting, carrying, and manipulating a log that probably weighed more than she did. Her teammates were polite, but clearly frustrated by her presence. Where they could muscle through the exercises with raw strength, Sarah had to rely on technique and leverage. When they carried the log overhead, her arms shook with the effort. When they did log rolls, she struggled to match their pace. "Come on, Lieutenant," one of her teammates urged. "We're only as strong as our weakest member." The comment stung, but Sarah gritted her teeth and kept going. By the end of the session, her hands were raw with splinters, her shoulders ached like she had been hit by a truck, and she was pretty sure she had pulled something in her back. But she had kept up, more or less. The obstacle course was next, a diabolical collection of walls, ropes, mud pits, and other implements of torture. Sarah watched the first few trainees navigate it, studying their techniques, looking for ways to compensate for her lack of upper body strength. When her turn came, she approached each obstacle methodically. The rope climb that others powered through with arm strength alone, she tackled using a footlock technique that she had learned years ago in gym class. The wall that others vaulted over, she climbed using finger holds and precise foot placement. She was slow, much slower than the others, but she made it through every obstacle. When she dropped off the final rope into the sand pit at the end, several of the trainees actually applauded. "Not bad, Lieutenant," said Jenkins, the young SEAL who had questioned her the day before. "Different technique, but effective." The final event of the morning was water training in the base pool. Sarah had always been a strong swimmer, and for the first time all morning, she felt like she was in her element. The first exercise was treading water while holding a brick above their heads. Sarah's smaller size actually worked to her advantage here. She was more buoyant than the larger men, and the brick represented a smaller percentage of her body weight. For 20 minutes, she held her own, watching as one by one, some of the trainees failed and had to grab the pool edge. When only 5 people were left in the water, Sarah was one of them. "Well, I'll be damned," she heard Martinez mutter to another instructor. Little lieutenant's got some fight in her. The final challenge was underwater swimming. They had to swim the length of the pool underwater, surface for exactly 3 seconds, then swim back. Sarah's lung capacity wasn't exceptional, but her stroke efficiency was excellent, and she made the first lap easily. On the return lap, her lungs were burning and black spots were dancing at the edges of her vision, but she forced herself to stay underwater to maintain her stroke rhythm. When she finally surfaced at the end, she was one of only 3 people who had completed the exercise without surfacing early. "Time," Martinez called out. Secure from water training. As the group climbed out of the pool, Sarah could feel the change in how the trainees were looking at her. The open amusement was gone, replaced by something like grudging respect. She hadn't been the fastest or the strongest, but she had completed every event, and she hadn't quit. "Attention on deck," someone called out, and everyone snapped to attention. Sarah looked around, confused, until she saw a figure approaching from the far end of the pool area. It was a Navy captain, his uniform crisp despite the heat, his bearing unmistakably that of a senior officer. What caught Sarah's attention, though, were the men walking with him. They wore civilian clothes, but everything about them screamed military. These weren't regular Navy personnel. These were operators, the kind of men who appeared in classified briefings and news reports with their faces blurred out. Captain Reynolds, the base commander, approached the group with measured steps. Sarah had seen him from a distance during her check-in, but this was her first close look at the man who ran one of the most elite training facilities in the military. "As you were," he said, and the group relaxed slightly. His eyes swept over the assembled trainees before settling on Sarah. "Lieutenant Chun, I presume?" "Yes, sir. How did you find your first morning of training?" Sarah was acutely aware that everyone was listening, that her answer would be analyzed and discussed long after the captain left. "Challenging, sir. Educational." Reynolds smiled slightly. "I'm sure it was." "Sergeant Martinez, how did the lieutenant perform?" Martinez looked uncomfortable, clearly not wanting to praise or criticize her in front of senior officers. "She completed all events, sir. Showed good determination." "Outstanding." The captain turned back to Sarah. "Lieutenant, I'm going to need you to cut your training short this morning. There's been a development that requires your immediate attention." Sarah felt her heart sink. Had she failed somehow? Was this a polite way of removing her from the program? "Sir, 15 minutes ago, we received intelligence indicating that the encryption protocols used in the Romania incident have been deployed against one of our teams currently in the field. Their communications compromised and requesting immediate support." The captain's expression was grim. "We need those new codes, Lieutenant. And we need them now." The training area fell silent. Sarah could feel the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders, heavier than any log they had lifted that morning. This wasn't training anymore. This was real-world consequences for real people who were counting on her to solve a problem that could mean the difference between life and death. "How long do I have, sir?" she asked. 6 hours. There's a helicopter standing by to take you to a communications facility with the equipment you'll need. Can you do it?" Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her. These men had just spent the morning testing her physical limits, and now they were about to see what she could do in her actual area of expertise. She thought about the SEAL team somewhere in hostile territory, cut off from support, because their codes had been broken. She thought about Romania, about the men who had died because their communications weren't secure. "I can do it, sir." Captain Reynolds nodded. "Outstanding. Sergeant Martinez, assign 2 of your men to accompany Lieutenant Shun. This is now a classified operation." As Sarah hurried toward the equipment building to gather her gear, she heard Martinez calling out behind her, "Jenkins, Rodriguez, you're with the lieutenant. Move." The morning had started as a test of her physical capabilities. Now it was about to become a test of everything else. The helicopter ride to the communications facility passed in a blur of rotor noise and nervous energy. Sarah sat between Jenkins and Rodriguez, her laptop balanced on her knees, as she pulled up the preliminary work she had been developing for the new encryption protocols. Every few minutes, one of the SEALs would lean over to look at her screen, their expressions showing polite confusion at the strings of mathematical formulas and code. "Ma'am," Jenkins shouted over the engine noise, "what exactly are you going to do when we get there?" "I'm going to perform a miracle," Sarah shouted back, and she wasn't entirely joking. The communications facility was a nondescript building nestled in the hills about 40 minutes from the base. From the outside, it looked like a small office complex, but Sarah knew that beneath the ordinary exterior was some of the most sophisticated electronic equipment in the world. Commander Patricia Walsh met them at the entrance, her expression grim. "Lieutenant Shun, thank God you're here. We got a team that's been dark for 3 hours. Last communication indicated they were under fire and requesting immediate extraction." As they hurried through corridors lined with humming servers and blinking monitors, Commander Walsh briefed Sarah on the situation. Team 7 inserted into a hostile area in Eastern Europe 36 hours ago. Primary mission was intelligence gathering, but it appears they walked into a trap. Enemy forces were ready for them, knew their insertion point, their routes, everything. They entered a room that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Wall-mounted screens displayed maps, communication logs, and scrolling lines of intercepted data. A dozen technicians sat at workstations, their faces illuminated by the glow of their monitors. "The enemy is using the same encryption-breaking technology they used in Romania," Walsh continued. "They're not just intercepting our communications, they're predicting them. They know what our teams are going to say before they say it." Sarah set her laptop down at an empty workstation and began connecting it to the facility's main systems. "Show me the last communication from Team 7. A technician brought up the radio logs on a nearby screen. Sarah studied the data, her mind automatically parsing the encryption patterns and communication protocols. What she saw made her blood run cold. "They're not just breaking our codes," she said quietly. "They're using our own communication patterns against us. Every time we send a message, they're learning more about how we encrypt data. It's like they have a master key that gets better every time we use it. Can you fix it?" Commander Walsh asked. Sarah was already typing, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she pulled up the new encryption protocol she had been developing. "I can try, but I need access to Team 7's current position and their communication equipment specifications." For the next 4 hours, Sarah worked with an intensity that surprised even her. She wrote code, tested algorithms, and refined encryption methods while the clock ticked away precious minutes. Jenkins and Rodriguez stood guard nearby, occasionally bringing her coffee or updates from the base. The breakthrough came when Sarah realized that the enemy wasn't just breaking individual codes. They were exploiting the predictable nature of military communication patterns. Standard military encryption changed keys on a schedule, but the underlying structure remained the same. The enemy had figured out how to predict the structure even when they couldn't crack the specific keys. "I need to talk to Team 7, Sarah announced suddenly. Commander Walsh looked up from her own workstation. "That's not possible. Their communication's dark. Any transmission could give away their position." "Not with this." Sarah held up a small device that she had been programming for the past hour. "This generates truly random encryption keys based on environmental factors, ambient temperature, radio static, even the exact timing of the operator's keystrokes. There's no pattern for the enemy to exploit, because there is no pattern. You're sure it will work? Sarah looked at the device in her hands, then at the faces around her. So many people were counting on this working. The team in the field, the commanders making decisions based on intelligence, the families waiting for their loved ones to come home. I'm as sure as I can be without field testing. But we're out of time for testing. Commander Walsh made the decision. Do it. What happened next was the longest 10 minutes of Sarah's life. Using the new encryption device, the communications team attempted to establish contact with Team 7. For several minutes, there was nothing but static. Then, faintly, a voice came through the speakers. Base, this is 7 Actual. We're pinned down, but alive. Enemy forces have withdrawn, but we're not sure why. The room erupted in quiet celebration, but Sarah was already working on the next phase. Tell them to switch to the new encryption protocol. I'm uploading the parameters now. Over the next hour, Sarah guided Team 7 through implementing the new communication system. It wasn't easy. They were operating under combat conditions with limited equipment, but gradually, clear communications were established. Base, this is 7 Actual, came the voice much clearer now. I don't know what you did, but the enemy seems to have lost track of us. We're able to move to the extraction point. Sarah felt her legs go weak with relief. It had worked. The new encryption system had broken the enemy's ability to predict and intercept communications. Commander Walsh put a hand on Sarah's shoulder. Outstanding work, Lieutenant. You just saved 6 lives. But Sarah wasn't done yet. Commander, I need to get this system to every team that might be compromised. And I need to train operators on how to use it under field conditions. Consider it done. The helicopter ride back to the base was very different from the trip out. Jenkins and Rodriguez looked at Sarah with something approaching awe, and she realized that somewhere between the morning's physical training and the afternoon's technological crisis, she had earned something she had been chasing for years, the respect of warriors. When they landed at Coronado, word of Sarah's success had already spread. Trainees who had been dismissive that morning now looked at her with curiosity and respect. The same trainee who had mocked her earlier approached as she walked toward the debriefing building. "Lieutenant," he said, offering a crisp salute. "I heard about what you did today. That was really something." "Thank you," Sarah replied, returning the salute. "But it was a team effort." "No, ma'am. What you did, that was all you. None of us could have done that." As Sarah made her way across the base, she reflected on how much had changed in just one day. She had started the morning trying to prove she could keep up with SEAL physical training. She was ending it having saved lives with her technical skills. But, more importantly, she had shown that the two weren't mutually exclusive. Sergeant Martinez was waiting for her outside the debriefing room, his expression unreadable. "Lieutenant, I owe you an apology." "Sergeant, this morning, I thought you were just another officer trying to play soldier. I was wrong. What you did today, that took real courage. Not just the technical work, but putting yourself on the line, knowing that if you failed, good men would die." Sarah felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon heat. "Thank you, Sergeant. That means a lot. There's something else," Martinez continued. "The captain wants to see you. And, ma'am, there are some people with him who are very interested in meeting you." As Sarah walked toward the command building, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had spent years proving she was smart enough to belong in the Navy's elite circles. Today, she had proven she was tough enough as well. But, more than that, she had proven that intelligence and courage could work together to accomplish things that neither could achieve alone. The real test, she realized, wasn't whether she could keep up with SEAL training or write unbreakable codes. The real test was whether she could integrate both sides of herself, the warrior and the scholar, into something greater than the sum of its parts. As she approached the command building, Sarah straightened her shoulders and prepared to find out what came next. She had a feeling her real adventure was just beginning. Inside the building, she could see figures moving behind the frosted glass windows of the commander's office. Important people making important decisions. And for the first time in her career, Sarah felt like she truly belonged in that room, not as an observer or an advisor, but as a full participant in whatever came next. The door opened as she approached, and Captain Reynolds stepped out, followed by the men in civilian clothes she had seen that morning. But now their expressions were different. Where before she had seen polite interest, now she saw something much more significant: respect. "Lieutenant Chun," the captain said, "there are some people I'd like you to meet. They have a proposition for you." The captain's office felt smaller with 6 people crammed into it, but Sarah hardly noticed the cramped quarters. Her attention was focused entirely on the 3 men in civilian clothes who were studying her with the intensity of people making a very important decision. "Lieutenant Chun," Captain Reynolds said, "I'd like you to meet Colonel James Harrison from Naval Special Warfare Command, and Mr. David Chun, no relation, from the Defense Intelligence Agency. The third gentleman's affiliation is classified, but his interest in your work is very real." The unnamed man stepped forward, and Sarah immediately understood that he was the one in charge, despite his unremarkable appearance. "Lieutenant, what you accomplished today was impressive, but we need to discuss what happens next. Sir, your new encryption methodology isn't just useful for tactical communications. Our analysis suggests it could revolutionize how we protect classified information across all branches of the military. We're talking about a paradigm shift that could render decades of enemy intelligence gathering efforts obsolete." Colonel Harrison opened a folder and spread several photographs across the captain's desk. These are satellite images of communication facilities in 3 different countries. All of them have been working around the clock since this morning, trying to crack the encryption you use to contact Team 7. So far, they've had 0 success. Sarah studied the images, seeing the signs of intense activity: vehicles moving between buildings, additional personnel, extended working hours indicated by lights burning in windows that should have been dark. "The problem," Mr. Chin said, "is that your success today has made you a target. Enemy intelligence services now know that someone in the U.S. Navy has developed encryption technology that makes their current capabilities obsolete. They're going to want to know who you are, and they're going to want to stop you from developing it further." The unnamed man nodded. "Which brings us to our proposition. We want to offer you a position with a joint task force that doesn't officially exist. Your mission would be to develop advanced cryptographic systems while working directly with special operations teams in the field." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "You mean embedding with teams during actual missions?" "That's exactly what we mean," Colonel Harrison said. "Your work today proved that theoretical knowledge isn't enough. The best encryption systems are developed by people who understand the operational environment where they'll be used. You've shown that you can handle both the technical and physical demands of the job." "There are risks," the unnamed man continued. "You would be deploying to hostile areas with teams conducting classified operations. The enemy would very much like to capture someone with your knowledge and skills. And if you're compromised—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah understood. If she were captured, the consequences would extend far beyond her personal safety. Captain Reynolds leaned forward. "Lieutenant, you don't have to answer right now. This is a career-changing decision, and it's not one to make lightly." Before Sarah could respond, there was a knock on the door. "Come," the captain called. Sergeant Martinez entered, his expression urgent. "Sir, sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation developing. We just received word that the enemy has deployed new jamming technology against Team 7. They're trying to disrupt the extraction." The unnamed man turned to Sarah. "Lieutenant, can your encryption system handle jamming?" Sarah was already reaching for her laptop. "Not in its current configuration, but I can modify it." "How long do we have?" "Team 7 is 20 minutes from the extraction point," Martinez reported. "I need 15 minutes and access to the communication array." Colonel Harrison stood up. "Do it." What followed was a frantic race against time. Sarah ran across the base to the communications building, her laptop clutched against her chest, while Martinez and 2 technicians cleared a path ahead of her. Behind them, the unnamed man spoke rapidly into a secure phone, coordinating with agencies whose names Sarah had only heard whispered in classified briefings. In the communications room, Sarah worked with a focus that bordered on supernatural. Her fingers moved across the keyboard without conscious thought, implementing modifications to the encryption algorithm that she was inventing in real time. The jamming signals being used against Team 7 were sophisticated, but they relied on disrupting normal communication patterns. The key, Sarah explained as she worked, is to make our signals look like background noise until they reach the receiver. The jamming system will ignore them because it won't recognize them as communications. 12 minutes after she started, Sarah looked up from her laptop. Try now. The communications officer activated the new system. For several seconds, there was nothing but static. Then, clear as if they were in the next room, came the voice of Team 7's leader. Base, this is 7 Actual. We're at the extraction point, but we've got company. Enemy forces are converging on our position. Copy, 7 Actual, the communications officer replied. Extraction birds are 2 minutes out. For the next 10 minutes, Sarah's encryption system allowed perfect communications between the extraction helicopters and the ground team. Enemy jamming attempts failed completely. Their equipment couldn't even detect the encrypted signals, much less disrupt them. Base, this is 7 Actual. All personnel accounted for and airborne. Thanks to the new toys, they saved our lives. The communications room erupted in quiet celebration, but Sarah barely heard it. She was staring at her laptop screen, watching data streams that showed her encryption system performing flawlessly under combat conditions. This wasn't just a theoretical success. This was proof that her work could save lives in the real world. The unnamed man appeared at her shoulder. Impressive work, Lieutenant. Have you made your decision about our offer? Sarah looked around the room at the faces surrounding her. These people weren't just colleagues. They were warriors who had accepted her as one of their own. She thought about Team 7, somewhere over the Mediterranean, alive, because of work she had done in this room. She thought about all the other teams who might face similar situations in the future. I have conditions, she said finally. Colonel Harrison raised an eyebrow, such as, I want to complete the SEAL training program. If I'm going to be embedded with teams in the field, I need to be a complete operator, not just a technical specialist. I need to be someone they can count on for more than just communication support. That's a tall order, Lieutenant, Martinez said. The full program is 6 months of the most intensive training in the world. I know what I'm asking for, Sergeant. But if I'm going to earn a place on these teams, I need to earn it completely. The unnamed man studied her for a long moment. There's something else you should know, Lieutenant. The encryption breakthrough you achieved today, it's not just tactically significant. Our analysts believe it represents a fundamental advancement in cryptographic science. You're not just helping special operations teams. You're potentially changing the balance of power in global intelligence operations. Sarah felt the weight of that responsibility settling on her shoulders, but it didn't feel overwhelming. Instead, it felt like validation of every choice she had made to get to this point. Which makes your second condition even more important, she said. Second condition, I want to train other people to do what I do. The knowledge can't be limited to one person. If something happens to me, the capability needs to survive. Captain Reynolds smiled. Lieutenant, I think you understand the mission better than we do. The unnamed man extended his hand. Welcome to the task force, Lieutenant Shun. I think this is going to be the beginning of a very interesting partnership. As Sarah shook his hand, she could hear activity outside the building. Teams were returning from training exercises, their voices carrying across the base as they debriefed and prepared for the next evolution. Tomorrow, she would join them again, but this time as more than an outsider trying to prove herself. She would be there as a full member of the community, someone who had earned her place through both intellectual capability and demonstrated courage under pressure. 6 months later, Sarah would graduate from the SEAL training program, one of only a handful of women ever to complete the course. She would deploy with special operations teams to some of the most dangerous places on Earth, where her encryption systems would save countless lives. She would train a new generation of cryptographer operators, people who combined technical expertise with operational capability. But all of that was in the future. For now, Sarah Chun walked across the Coronado base as the sun set over the Pacific, knowing that she had found her place in a world where intelligence and courage were not just compatible, but essential partners. The SEAL rookies who had mocked her rank that first morning now saluted when they saw her, not because regulations required it, but because she had earned something that couldn't be taught or faked: their respect. And in a few hours, when the base commander made his evening rounds, he would stop by her quarters to personally thank her for her service, a gesture that would be noticed by everyone on the base. The message would be clear. Lieutenant Sarah Chun wasn't just visiting their world. She had become an essential part of it. The transformation was complete. The woman who had arrived as an outsider with something to prove had become exactly what the SEAL community valued most: a warrior who could be counted on when everything was on the line.